We're glad to have Dr. Dan Morgan on our lovely podcast here, the CC and JT Amateur Hour, where production values go to die. That one's CC.
And that's JT.
And that's Dan Morgan over there. Dr. Morgan is joining us from the East Coast, and we are so happy to have him on board along that continues our series of interviewing independent writers. Independent writers are do it all. We do it all. We do the writing, we do the editing, we do the covers, we do the marketing, which is actually a four-letter word in the independent writing thing. But Dan has got to put together a very, very interesting memoir, and we really are happy to have him on board to talk about that. So, Dan, introduce yourself and take it away.
Well, thanks, everybody. Thank you, JT and Cassidy. I'm Dan, and this is actually a memoir that I wrote. It's the first thing that I've written that's not in the academic realm, and it's a memoir. I figured it was time, and so I started it a couple of years before it came out, and was really happy to see its release, and am very humbled and moved to see some of the reviews, the industry reviews. They've been quite encouraging and very positive, and I'm really happy about that. So I'll tell you anything you want to know about it, but I never know where to start. It's because I wrote it. It's like, tell us about yourself. I don't know. Yeah. I liked it. It's good. It's a memoir.
But it's your story, and it's always difficult thinking about you that makes it worthy of pages. What is it about you? And and I'm not talking about the ego trip. We're all unique in our own ways. What is it about Dan Morgan that got you to put it between covers?
Yeah, it's so odd. There are a couple of things that prompted me to write it. One is, as I get to be at a certain place in life, I've shared some stories with people that are maybe newer adults, and they just look at me like that could not possibly have happened. And I said, that's true. I did stand-up comedy, and I skated with the roller derby, and I lived on the streets for a minute, and I was almost murdered by a serial killer. Yeah, that's all true. And for me, it's just part of life. Another day in, living life. But I thought, you need to write this down, because if you don't, nobody will believe it. And there's some lessons in there that I think are transferable. In fact, I'm finding that out, that because I've looked at some of the reviews, and I'm a gay man of a certain age, and the reviews that have been written are from younger heterosexual men. I think there's a couple that seem like they're from women. And I thought, as I suspected, some of the things that I have lived and some of the things that I've learned are generalizable. And it doesn't matter, like it crosses the boundaries of gender and age and sexuality and geography. And it's been quite an affirmation for me.
Well, that's amazing. It sounds like you've had quite the life. But what really stands out to me is the title of your book. And why did you choose to use that particular Welsh word as your title?
Hiraeth is a word in Welsh that it just doesn't come across in English. Mm-hmm. So it can seem like a homesickness, but maybe for a home that never was, or a longing for a place that maybe you've never even been, or for a time, a nostalgia that maybe you didn't live through. First time I went to Wales and people used the word, I thought, I get it. I really understand what you mean, because the Welsh are known to brood. We just will sit and we'll drink our tea and we'll brood. And a lot of it is just this Hiraeth. It's like the way it used to be, or never was, or could have been. And that speaks to so much of the chapters in here. It's like, well, what if this had happened? Or wasn't that a time? Or had it just been a little bit different? Or I missed that.
So let's talk about your path, because in the few seconds that we've known you, you've mentioned that you've done that. Whereas you mentioned of a certain age, when we were growing up, there were specific roles in society. You were going to be doing this. You're going to go to school. You're going to go to college. You're going to have a family. You're going to do. There were specific pathways, and you didn't take those pathways. So where did you go right? Not where did you go wrong, but where did you go right to become the individual that you are today?
Well, thanks for not asking just where did you go? Where are you? What happened to you? I was fortunate in hindsight. I look back on this now. I was so fortunate because I had no pathway. I grew up in a home where my father was a drug addict and my mother lived with severe, profound depression. We lived on the public assistance program, on the dole, as they say in the UK, on welfare, as we say in the US. And we lived in the home of my uncle who didn't speak. He knew how, he had a job and everything, but he just didn't talk. And so I just lived in this world where there were no rule. Well, there were rules, but you had to figure them out and they changed. But there were no expectations because they didn't know what to tell me to do. And so because of that, it just opened up the whole world for me. And I was a curious kid, and I was determined to find some place that healthier and happier and safer to live. And so I just thought, and I didn't know this, maybe I did on the inside, but I just thought, what do I have to lose? I'll just try everything. And I did. And I think that's what started me on this path of, growing up in a city at that time, which is a very rule abiding place. You get a job, you work in the steel mill, you do that, you do this, or you do that, or you do that. I couldn't do any of that. Nobody would have hired me to do any of that stuff at that time, given who I was. And I thought, well, then what else is there? Try anything. And I remember when my uncle had gotten a television, and this sport game called roller derby was on television. I thought, that's what I want to do, because people skated around on a bank track, and the boys and the girls played by the same rules. Skate, girls with the girls, boys with the boys. But I thought, I could do that. Why not? And I would skate up and down the sidewalk hours and hours every day thinking, I'm going to be in the roller derby. I just know it. Nobody in my neighborhood, in my school, probably in the whole city believed me. And I didn't care because I grew up in a place where I thought everybody was crazy anyway. So why don't I just do it my own way?
Oh, that's amazing. I spent a lot of time roller skating as a kid myself.
Oh,
So,
I spent a lot of time watching roller derby, so I feel
Hey.
feeling this right here.
yeah, that was really big. Early 80s or so, a lot of roller skating. But so you ended up getting a couple of degrees, I believe. And how did you, since you were going off and doing all these fun things like roller
Hmm.
derby and comedy, how did you end up getting into that academic sphere?
What you're implying means you were doing all these fun things, and then you went into academia.
Yeah, and I wanted to make sure I had fun doing that as well. And I
Hmm.
never really kind of felt like I belonged in any of these things that I did, although I loved it. Oh, I did love doing stand-up comedy, and I felt like I belonged there until I didn't. Roller derby, I was not at all the best roller derby skater, but eventually I learned like how to do it enough that we got to go to Japan, and I skated on the USA versus Japan team. It was an all-star tournament. And when I went to Japan, it was the first time that I had been outside of the continental Americas. I had been to Mexico and I had been to Canada, but life in Japan was so vastly different. I had this experience. I was taking pictures all over the place because we skated at the Tokyo Dome, and I was taking photos here and I was so excited one night I left my camera at the Tokyo Dome, and we went back to the hotel, and the next morning I realized my pictures are gone. I lost my camera. And we went back to practice the next day, and my camera was right there where I left it. And I asked one of the players on the Japanese team, I said, "Excellent, nobody took my camera." And he looked at me as if to say, "Why would we? It's not ours, it's yours." Nobody would take it. I couldn't get over that. I couldn't get past that. And so there was that experience. And then I was on the road one time. And when you're doing stand-up comedy, there's a couple things you do. You either get drunk, and I had been sober by then. I had been sober for some years at that time. Or you read, because there's not a lot to do. And when you're in a place for a couple of days, either you don't know your way around, so you don't know what the sights are, or it's such a small place that there really isn't a lot to do. So you read. And I came home from this road trip once. I had been gone, and I was so tired. I fell asleep in my clothes. I put my book bag on the table or on my desk and just fell asleep. I was out like a light. I woke up the next morning, and the first thing I saw was my desk with all these books. And I remember thinking to myself, that looks like a smart person's desk. Huh. And I looked at the things, the titles of the books that I was reading, and they were all, books by everybody from Cornel West to Betty Friedan. And I thought, and someone had helped me understand that that was sociology, that was the way that I was looking at the world, and from doing stand-up comedy and from getting a chance to travel. And I thought, okay, this is it. And so, when stand-up comedy was over and when roller derby was, I kind of aged out of that for a little bit, for the most part. And I thought, well, what next? And so that's when this pathway opened to go into graduate school. And I have to tell you, if anyone out there is thinking of that, graduate school was the easiest thing. It was the easiest. And it was because, and this is what somebody explained to me, I finally had met someone who, he was a doctor, and he said, listen, here's the ticket. If they get you in, they're going to want to get you out. So they will be invested in helping you. But beyond that, I just thought the coursework was fun. It was interesting. I couldn't believe it was, I guess, easy and fun. I loved the classes. And then I got my first academic teaching job a little bit after that. I'm making this sound like it was a smooth transition. It was not, but for the sake of, of the story, after I was doing my first teaching, it was in Honolulu. I was teaching in Hawaii, and that's when I enrolled in the doctoral program at USC. And I never set foot on the campus because they would fly the professors out to the university, out to Honolulu. So there was a cohort of 25 of us, and we got our doctorate degree that way. And again, it was easy and it was fun. It was a blast. I never knew that I was like, for me, I thought, this is not where you came from, pal. Like, who knew?
No, that's excellent. We have a lot of empathy because we are later in life college students too. So we have empathy with this. But let's talk about something you've been touching on sort of along the way. You're an international traveler. You've been to both Asia and you've been to Europe and Mexico. You haven't followed the path, the expectation path. Yet you still are so you've been on the outside looking in, but you're also on the inside looking out. So you have these kind of dual roles as you've gone through life. So dual roles affect your writing.
I have often felt like a spy. When I went to college, when I got to undergraduate school, the way that happened, I was in my senior year of high school, and the girl that I went to the prom with told me that she was going to college after high school. And I said, oh, can I come? I didn't know. But so I found myself inserted or in the midst of these populations and these experiences where I never thought like I was one of them. I kind of thought like I was doing qualitative research, And lo and behold, when I ended up, doing my doctorate and some of the stuff that I published has been qualitative research. And from there, you can cull and pull stories that may not be generalizable, but they are telling nonetheless. And so that's the way that I've approached so many things, and there is boundless curiosity. So if anyone is listening and is looking for maybe some guidance or direction, I would say to lead with curiosity. We can edit this out if you want to later, but my motto in academia and a lot of other stuff too, which is that anything worth doing is worth doing half-assed. Just get started. Just go for it. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Many, many things I've done have not worked in that traditional way, whether it's a bit on stage, whether it's a research project, whether it's, some of the skating things that didn't turn out well. Like a lot of people would call it failing. I don't. I just call it living life. So I think it's like just try stuff, because when you try stuff, you learn stuff.
So since you did do a lot of academic writing before you did your memoir, did you find it was easier or harder to make that transition? Because academic writing is a very different beast than any other kind of writing. I'm very fond of history and doing citations and things like that. There's always a very strict kind of format for doing academic writing. But I'm sure with a memoir, you can be a lot more free form. Did you find that transition difficult?
It's like code switching. And when someone from a minority population is in the presence of someone from a dominant group, they will code switch, whether it's a formal language like Spanish to English, or whether, like if you're a gay person and you're trying to fit in with a mainstream heterosexual world, you change your language, you code switch. And so writing from academics to memoir has been a form of code switching, where I've been using a voice that is palatable to a certain population called academia. And in memoir, I'm using a voice that's palatable to me. And if someone else doesn't like it, then I have nothing to lose. And it was the first time that I felt like I could be really authentic. I got an email message from a former student of mine. I had no idea he had read my book. And he said it was so wonderful and liberating for him to read and know more about me than he did in the context of when I was teaching. And I thought, yeah, because when I was teaching, I wasn't allowed to be a whole person in front of you, was I? Now, had I not been gay, or maybe some other people don't have that experience, but I often felt like I had to constrain what I was writing. There's still I never felt safe in academia. Whereas writing this, I actually felt safe. One of my trusted elders said to me one time, this is as I was starting to write this, I had said more than once, I said, I want to write something like this. And he said, why don't you? Because you've been writing for 20 years for people who don't like you anyway. Why don't you just tell the truth for once?
Absolutely.
That's a great point.
That's a great point. Okay, so before we dive into the questions, and I may be asking you to repeat yourself because I think you did already say it. What is the message, if there is a singular message, that you want to say that comes from your memoir?
There's a person that I was when I was a really little teeny tiny itty bitty person that kind of knew who I was curious, was open, and was also wise. A little 4-year-old soul on this earth. I knew who I was. And that got taken away from me. And writing this has allowed me to get back to that person. In therapy circles, they call it the inner child. And I can see why, because it's like I was able to come back and meet that little kid and say, wow, you were always here. You were here the whole time. You were here the whole time. Yeah.
Resonate.
It really does.
That does resonate. Okay, so we're gonna segue back to we sent you a bunch of questions that we base on James Lipton's Inside the Actor Studio, who we just had so much fun watching him over the years. We adapted them to questions for writers and hope to help the writers connect to potential readers. So the very first question, even though you've been writing academically for 20 something years, let's talk about what was your I am a real honest to goodness writer moment.
I don't know if I've had it yet, but there have been some moments that have been affirmative for me. One of them was with my editor. In our first editing session, he didn't say it, but in our second editing session, he apologized to me because he said, I had prejudged you. And he was crying. He started to cry because there's a piece in here that's very, I rhetorically asked the reader, I bet when I mentioned this, you probably were thinking this, weren't you? And he admitted to me, he goes, I was thinking that. And he apologized. And I thought, well, that's what writing can be. It can be souls relating to each other. It can be that connection between people who are unalike in many ways.
No, that's amazing. That gets to me because we all hope that we will resonate with a reader in that way. It's amazing to have had that moment. So with everything that you've been through, and a memoir is a very personal experience, who would you say is your writing role model and why?
I don't know if I have a writing role model because I didn't have anyone to look to when I wrote this. I didn't say, oh, I wanted it to sound like that, or I want to do what they did. I like people who tell the truth, and I like people who take chances, and I like people who write with courage and conviction. So instead of people, I used principles to guide me.
And you can't go wrong
principles.
with that.
Principles don't let you down. Yeah.
Yeah.
All of us people, we're fallible. We'll let you down.
Yeah.
It's true.
No, nailed it. Okay, so, and again, I may be asking you to repeat yourself, but what do you love about writing?
Not a lot. Writing is like being in a bad relationship. It really is. I mean, because there are times when it's really good, and I'm going to say this in a way that you'll understand without me having to say it. You know how some relationships are bad, but there are parts of it that are really good? That's what writing's like for me. So there are times when it just pays off. And the final version, the final piece is satisfying. It is really nice. But it's tough. It's like going through therapy sometimes. Like I cried. I remember like typing and just crying, like and writing. So I'm not afraid of that, and I don't think that's a bad thing. But for people who are writing in the field of memoir, I would say that you need to be ready for that. Because you can't stay on the surface and write. If it's you got to get in there and get under these things. And I would not suggest writing a memoir until you have some healing, until you are able to look back at some things and see them differently than you did when you were living through them. Because I was a bitter little person for a long time, and I would not want to read a memoir from someone who was still bitter. I want to hear the bitterness, but I don't want it to be from that voice. So for people who are going into writing, depending upon what you're writing, because I have tried my hand. I've got some secret fiction things that I'm writing too. Although fiction is too hard for me. Fiction is like telling a lie and having to remember everything. Whereas when you're just writing a memoir or writing something that's more academic or something like that, you don't have to try to remember things that you made up. But the writing process, it can't be for you what it is for me because we're all different. But some of the similarities might be, depending upon the topic, get ready to know yourself. And that's true for academic writing too, because one of the things that we learn as academics is to learn what your biases are, and don't pretend you don't have them. Acknowledge and learn what they are, because that's going to influence what you're writing.
That is so true. As I mentioned, I'm into history and didn't even consider the fact that history is so biased until I was much, much older.
Yeah.
It's something that we kind of have to learn for ourselves along the way.
Yeah.
But you were saying that there isn't a lot you like about writing, but is there one particular thing that you absolutely dread about writing?
No. And I'm exaggerating. I do this at first to dissuade people, because I think a lot of writing is romanticized. Like, I'm going to write poetry. I'm going to write a memoir. And you can. But I want to hit you over the head first before you start, just so when you start it, you realize, oh, this isn't that bad. The part about writing that I just love is the honoring, because okay. So I'll tell you this, so I'm going to get choked up, but that's okay. So when I finally understood that there was that little 4-year-old kid that started to lose his voice because I started to listen to other people and started to have some experiences during the writing process, I was able to come square and one with that 4-year-old kid. And what I said to him was, please forgive me. And so
That's heavy. That's very profound.
yeah, please forgive me because I tried to kill you. I tried to,
I think about, it's,
yeah, yeah.
because you've written a memoir. This next question is we've just spent like 20, 30 minutes talking about this next question.
Mm-hmm.
What single significant life experience affects your writing, good or bad?
I don't remember what year it was, but there are two. One is I was driving on the freeway. On the East Coast, we call them highways. In the UK, we call them motorways. On the West Coast, we call them freeways. I was driving on the freeway because I was in California at the time, and I saw a dog running on the freeway, running. And if anyone has witnessed this, you know what the dog is doing. It doesn't know what it's doing. It's just trying to stay alive. It's panicked. It's frantic. It doesn't make any sense. It's people run over and try to help. No, and it just keeps running and running and running. When I saw that dog, I saw myself, and I stopped and wept in my car. I couldn't help the dog, sorry, but I was just completely ineffective. But that experience, I just thought, that has been how you've lived life for the longest time. That, and when the pandemic started to ease and we were allowed to see each other again, and two friends from years and years ago came to visit me in my home, and I was so happy to see them. They're the nicest people. They really are. They're just the most wonderful people. And the visit was uncomfortable. And one of them said, it was a husband and wife that I've known for years, and they said, every time there's a noise, you get up and look out the window. Do you have post-traumatic stress? And I sat with that, and then I went into therapy for this and realized, yes, I mean, if you witness 3 murders, up close, that could lead to post-traumatic stress, those experiences might have triggered something from earlier. So I realized you need to write this stuff down. If you don't do anything with it, at least do yourself the service of writing it down to acknowledge this, because it's going to be part of your healing. So those two things are what prompted me to write this particular, which, by the way, I wrote as a comedy.
Oh, yeah. All that leads to stand-up comedy. Yeah.
Right.
I'll be here all week, folks. Thanks.
Try the veal.
We'll be here all week.
Tip your servers.
So knowing how difficult it is to do this writing life, would you recommend it to a loved one, and why or why not?
It's a personal decision. I wouldn't discourage anyone. I wouldn't encourage anyone, but I will share my own experience with that to say it was one of the best things I've ever done. And I would say that if it hadn't sold any copies at all, because at least it would be a record of someone, and what I do now is I am in the presence of a lot of newer adults, and this is the strangest thing. I just have to say this the way I need to say it. So many of these newer adults think that I have wisdom. For me, it's just, these are just things I've learned. And I'll say something. I just had a conversation yesterday with someone who was having trouble at work. And I said, just remember, you don't work for that company. You work for yourself. You work at that company and you work with others, but you work for yourself. So when you put yourself first, that's going to change the dynamic. And he just thought, that's the most brilliant thing. And I said, yeah, I don't think it is, but okay, if it helps you, great.
No, but that's how we were raised. That in our early years, we believed that we'd go work for a company. We'd be there for 40, 50 years, retire, having done our service and our duty to that company.
Yes,
But
yes,
that mindset has needed to change for so many reasons during our life.
yes.
As you
It was a
said, it has.
patriarchal, yeah, it was a patriarchal construct.
That is an excellent point. Okay, so you wrote a memoir, so I'm not really sure how this last question is going to affect, but we'll give it a try anyway. What is
I'm
something
ready.
unexpected in your past, other than the things you've already talked about, that we won't find in your bio?
Yeah, there's some more stuff I've had with the medical industrial complex that I didn't put in the book because it's too fresh. People just like brew some tea, cook for yourself. I have this, I brewed this myself. I have all different kind of natural teas. I brew astragalus, I brew nettles. So that's something that is not in the book, but I'm really crunchy. I make my
No,
own
no,
food. I know what ingredients are in there. I brew my own, beverages. I don't use any alcohol or. So that part, me being kind of crunchy, that's not in there. But now you know.
no, that's fun. No, that's
Yep.
actually fun. Okay, so Dan, we're coming up on the end here. So hold up your book and tell us where we can find your book. Where can we find you?
Yes, this is Hiraeth, the voice of home. This is me on the back. These are all pictures I've taken over the years. And it's loaded, chock full of pictures. I even have I think I have one of the serial killer that almost got me. That might be in here too. And it's available, Atmosphere Press is the publisher. It's also available through Amazon and the other distributors.
Okay, excellent.
And I recorded the audiobook in July 2025, and we are still waiting for it to come up for Audible to release it through Amazon. So unfortunately, the only thing available now is the paper copy. But stay tuned, the audiobook will be released soon.
No, that's excellent. No, people have come up to us and said, "What do you guys do in your audiobook?" And it's like, yeah, when we can afford it. So this has been excellent. This has been fun. Boy, I wish
Yep.
we need to do this like 2 or 3 more times. But for now, we want to thank Dr. Dan Morgan for coming on our little podcast, the CC and JT Amateur Hour, where production value goes to die, where we interview independent authors who've had interesting journeys, to say the least, and who've had complex upbringings and turned out to be fantastic people. This has been fun.
It's been a lot of fun.
And so,
It's
Dan, we
been a
thank you.
blast for me.
We encourage the world to go out and check out Dan's book. Thank you, sir.
Oh, wait, which I happen to have here. I'm just kidding. Thank you so much for spending time with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you,
Have a
sir.
great rest of your day.
You